Cool. Yeah, we're excited to talk with you guys about publishing, publishing your work of all kinds, working with publishers, self-publishing. We both come from backgrounds that are pretty related to artist books for me, art publications for Gean, and so I think that a lot of our focus will be, or at least for me, around artist books. And so even if you're someone who doesn't make artist books in particular, I'm excited to talk about it, and I feel like there is a lot that everyone can learn from artist books and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Good morning. So like Emmett said, I'm Gean Moreno, and I have a little press called Main Publications that's been around since 2019, and we have a little shop down in River Road in West Miami. So I have a stack of books there, so if you guys want to circulate them, and at the end of the thing, if you really like them, just keep it. So I mean, as we go, we can kind of chat. Yeah, so this is the story.
When did you start it? When did
So
you start
this
that project?
opened in February of last year, and it's the shop we kind of think of an extension of the books. So it's either so this is the first show we did was with Raphael Dominich, and these are actually those slots, the wooden things are slotted into the wall, and these paintings fold into books and kind of slide into the slots and they go away. So it's kind of this book-related project, or this research we're doing, we'll kind of present halfway through things we do. So yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna get up and down, change some of the slides. So I'm here from New York, from Printed Matter, which is a nonprofit dedicated to artist books and related publications, distribution of artist books, sort of first and foremost. We're a bookstore. We're two bookstores. I manage our location in the East Village neighborhood of Manhattan. That's the middle photo is Printed Matter St. Mark's. It's just like a really brief introduction or history to Printed Matter. If you don't know, we were founded in 1976 in downtown Manhattan by artists and art workers and people who were really excited about the sort of emerging field of artist books, of just multiples in general, making cheap print work as a way to sort of for artists to really take things into their own hands and to sort of democratize their work in a way, in a moment when the commercial art world, especially around the Soho area, was really sort of booming, taking off. There was a lot of sort of centralization of commercial art, and artists like Saul LeWitt, art writers, critics like Edith Diak were very, they're sort of sick of that in a way, and decided to start Printed Matter as a place where artists could, as I said, just sort of take things into their own hands. So I feel like I've been at Printed Matter for about 5 years, and one of the best things about it, I feel, is just seeing how many different ways people get their work out into the world and get their projects into people's hands in book form, in print form. It's I don't know, it really can be inspiring because the medium is so accessible, or can be so accessible, and it has, the book and print in general has this history as, it's art, but it's an object, it's a multiple, there's this idea that if you make your work and there's not just one of them, no one person can own it, a collector can't acquire it and have it and control who can see it and when they can see it and for how much money they can see it. We can choose to make a ton of the things that we make and give them to a lot of people for free sometimes. And so I feel like I see a lot of people who have self-published, and that I think is something that today I want to touch on a lot is self-publishing and the opportunities for that, and sort of like I mean, we want to sort of, we were just saying like demystify in a way these processes of publishing, and I think that for some people self-publishing can be kind of a daunting thing to think about because it does just seem like all of these different roles you take on for yourself, and it's your job to be an expert in every single part of the process. And that's not wrong. That's not wrong about self-publishing, but it's also, I don't know, it's just very achievable. So just really quickly, Print and Matter, we do the New York Art Book Fair, the LA Art Book Fair, and then most recently our newest book fair is the East Village Zine Fair, which was started by myself and my former coworker at Print and Matter St. Mark's. So down there on the bottom right, that is the East Village Zine Fair from last year. It's a single block festival outside on St. Mark's Place. Right outside the store, we have about 70 exhibitors that are all local to New York and all sort of making zines or otherwise, different publications that are within that sort of spirit of DIY publishing. So especially through that, I have seen a lot of different projects that started, just from different, people who start as, artists who are exhibiting and they're making an exhibition pamphlet, and that exhibition pamphlet becomes a whole project. Writers who are making poetry chapbooks and then, connect with illustrators and then they make an artist book, just all of these things. And then just sort of, that top right picture, that's the very first printed matter from the 70s, which I'd never seen that picture before, and I was looking for a picture to include there. I thought it was pretty charming. And then something else we do bookbinding workshops and workshops of other kinds, and I'll sort of come back to that because I am a big sort of proponent of everyone knowing how to bind a book, because everyone definitely can bind a book. Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe.
It's like, don't talk about it. Has anyone here visited Print and Matter before?
There's something there.
Yes. Cool. Great. I hope that everyone gets a chance to. Perfect.
Super.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we all did.
Oh, that's really smart. So yeah, I think we both wanted to just talk really briefly about two different sort of seminal, either really specific artist books or book artists. So this is a book called 26 Gasoline Stations. The artist is Ed Ruscha. First published in 1963, republished many times since then, and in many different variations and lots of spoofs, riffs, reproductions, whatever you want to call it. This book it's exactly what it sounds like. It's 26 pictures of gasoline stations in the US, and it is self-published, this book, and a big part of the reason that it is self-published is because no one wanted to publish it. At the time, a lot of, the art publishers were like, I don't get it, this is simple, this is not, they didn't get it. And sometimes I feel I don't get it either, but I think that then that's part of it. A sort of a story that I like to tell is sort of a way to illustrate the ways in which artist books were really sort of messing with the status quo, I guess, of art and publishing at the time. And I don't know if it's true, but it could be. Is that Ed Ruscha submitted this book to be housed in the Library of Congress, and it got rejected. And in the sort of rejection letter, the reason that was stated is that it didn't have any information. And all the books in the Library of Congress have to have information in them. And I think that that's really interesting. And as, and maybe the Library of Congress may think that, but we may think otherwise as people who are sort of reading visually as well as textually and seeing an artist book as a mode of communicating information that is just more conceptual, more abstract, more, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, something like that. So I think it's a good place to start considering what the mode of a book can open up as possibilities for artists to communicate that information.
Yeah, so I was thinking of Ulises Carrion as a companion to Ed Richet, a very different kind of artist. So he's a Mexican conceptual artist, and he spent the second half of his life in Amsterdam. And I think I like this quote because I think it kind of, I've heard many definitions about what an artist book is, and I think the one that he offers was kind of quite concise and kind of gets to the thing of it, right? So the book is a spatial object. So it's not text. He says text is one thing, and books that have text, like novels, he says, are really interesting plot-wise, but they're not really interesting books, right? Nothing happens in them. Right, things happen in the text, they'll say, but not in the book. So the book is actually like a spatial construction, right? It's an architecture of some sort, but it's also a series of moments. So it's both, it's like linear. In the linearity of the book, you can kind of alter things so that each moment becomes kind of highlighted. So it's both a temporal experience and a spatial experience, and it might not even have to do with reading at all, right? So I think this is quite a nice way to distinguish artist books from books that contain texts. And I think he's kind of just quite, this is the old art, right? The writer writes. That's so boring. So I think I just really like this quote. I think it's quite gets to what we're trying to get at. So I think that's a good overview. Like we just wanted to start with some historical kind of things, so we got into the nitty-gritty of it. So yeah, next slide, please.
There we go. Sorry.
Right. So the first thing that we kind of want to talk about was publishers, right? And I think in this exercise of trying to demystify what this field looks like, there's a kind of bit of a hierarchy, let's call it, of publishers. And it's not that one is better than the other, it's that one does one thing and the other does something else very different. So when you pick up a book and you see something like Rizzoli or Delmonico, that's a very large company. And it's, that's not the place to start. If you're going to self-publish or if you're in the studio making a book, right? Because these will be people that will kind of go to MoMA and collaborate with MoMA, right? Because they have business plans and things like that.
They're companies.
Yeah, they're companies. And so the small press is kind of still a company of some sort, but somehow they're interested in the people they work with, as opposed to in the numbers that they work with. So this is a good place if you don't want to self-publish or you maybe have a small chapbook. Folks like, Ugly Duckling Press does a chapbook series every year. They do like a bilingual chapbook series, or do like, are translated like a young Mexican poet or something. They would be really interested in that. And every year, I think it's called Transit, the series. So, yeah, so these are kind of, I don't know, the good guys.
Yeah, I guess
the autonomous guys.
Yeah. I guess small press. I feel like this is something that we will return to. Oh, goodbye. So, it's okay. Something that I think that we'll return to is just finding the right fit for your project. And regarding small presses, there are so many. I feel like a lot of people got started with publishing projects during the pandemic and continue to do that as well, which is really exciting. So yeah, like you're saying, if you have a specific project, chances are there is a small press that's up and running that has, the sort of infrastructure to get your project out there that would be really interested in your project, because many of these small presses have these niches, just like will be interested. And so finding the right people to get in touch with is, fortuitous in that way. And then, so I can sort of see self-publishing. There are lots of reasons you might choose to self-publish as opposed to working with a large publisher or even a small publisher, small press. And a lot of it, I brought a book that I think is in my hotel, but it's okay, I can tell you about it, is published by Genderfail, one of the small presses that we included up there, and it is the person, B. Oakley, who runs Genderfail. They sort of wrote about their experience running a small press, and that started, I believe, they were only publishing their own work, and then it expanded to working with other artists, and that's something that I would also encourage all of you to do. So like, not only can anyone self-publish, I think that anyone can have a small press also, because it's just doing your own thing and then doing your own thing with other people. But yeah, I think that they make a point that two of the biggest reasons someone might choose to self-publish are time and money. If you have a project that feels really urgent to you and you want to get it out there, you should self-publish. The process of finding a publisher, of getting things all approved. I don't know. What would you say is sort of the timeline for if you're editing a book, you're publishing a book? What? Yeah, no, that's all good.
Yeah. So a book. Let's say we were taught over the last 5 years, we've been collaborating with larger institutions quite a bit. So we're doing a book with MCA Chicago. We're doing a book with Musel Barrio. These are 18-month projects. From the time we kind of get the contract signed, so we're at the printers, it'll be about 18 months. So and it's also variable, right? It's 18 months if they've done the photography, right?
Yeah, that's speedy.
Yeah.
Printed Matter also has a small publishing series, and I'm not as involved in that. I did just we did sort of like a newsprint artist book publication with the artist Lucchesa Brampman Verissimo last fall that I worked on, and that was amazing. But that was super fast. That was like they did an exhibition in our windows, and we were like, let's do a newspaper, and then did it in a few weeks, which was really hard. But yeah, generally for our published, our book projects, it is a similar timeline, if not longer, because we're very small.
Yeah, I think also what I want to say in relation to self-publishing is the places where you're gonna have your huge kind of money pits are going to be in gathering the material, right? That's going to be one big thing, especially if you have to photograph, go to archives, get rights. In design, it's going to be your other huge kind of money pit, and in printing. So one of the benefits of self-publishing is kind of the two money pits you most likely can do yourself. Mm-hmm. And depending on the scale, you might even be able to do the third one. So we do this kind of little series of chapbooks. And we just got a really nice color copier and a binding machine. Yeah. So for about, $700, we have this running thing. And then we do kind of in-house design for it. So beyond that initial thing and paper costs, it kind of runs itself, or barely nothing.
Yeah, I guess another thing to speak to that is I think that people who are doing self-publishing or running their small presses are, in my experience, kind and generous people who will sort of like lend you their machines or teach you how to do something because they understand what it is like to try and get a project off the ground by yourself. I don't know. I feel like some of these things on the bottom right, these self-published projects, temporary services out of Chicago by Mark Fisher, which is a lot of sort of cultural urban internet like excavation, honestly kind of Ruche-ish, just like putting a lot of traffic cones in a book, and that's the book. Madarile, run by this photographer, Martha Sandoval. She's amazing. It's photography zines, really sort of beautiful photography zines, all by immigrants, first-generation immigrants in the U.S. Chang Yu Chen is an artist who used to work for Printed Matter and is a good friend of mine who makes very beautiful artist books that are really sort of art objects. And she has a really expansive studio practice as well. She's building her own language out of pieces of coral. Right, she's like one of the smartest people I've ever met, and if you are curious about that, I will show you her Instagram because it's really amazing. And then Black Mass, two artists, Yusuf Hassan and Kwame Sorrell, in New York, and they have they make zines, regular like half-letter zines, small zines that are also sort of archive-based conceptual projects, a lot having to do with diagrams and sound and performance and blackness and all of these heavily sort of researched and composed things. And then 8 Ball Community is an organization that I work with really closely through Printed Matter because we co-organize the East Village Zine Fair with them. They're another nonprofit. They're entirely volunteer run. I think that, they've been around for about 10 years now, and they publish zines. They have a great zine library. They have their own TV station. They have a radio channel. They do their own fairs. They're really great. So this is just all to say that there are so many projects out there that have really gained a lot of traction that are totally self-published. And I think that any one of these people, or pretty much anyone, would be happy to like talk to you about your project as well.
Yeah, I just want to mention this. Brian Keenan in LA wrote this thing called Second Cannons, and what he did was so I was thinking of some kind of hybrid model in between. So what he did when he finished grad school was he knew the books were going to be like his main outlet. So he just kind of started a press, and what that allowed him to do was to continuously produce his work, but also to start kind of inviting people that he thought would give that work context. And so he built a small kind of press that was, the main current was his production, but that on the edges kind of built almost this community of common thinkers or something.
Yeah, I like that. There's a lot of small presses or self-published projects that do have these things on the periphery that sort of bolster the practice. Like Black Mass is always sort of exhibiting. They had a big part in the MoMA PS1 Greater New York show. Martha from Mata Relay, she does a bunch of photography workshops. 8 Ball Community does a ton of stuff. It's just like it whatever practice you already have going on, there's a way that publishing can be a part of it. Even if publishing is the thing that's sort of on the periphery or the thing that's sort of holding up what you're already doing, if you go that way too.
So there's publishers and there are distributors. Sometimes they're the same, one company does both things, but sometimes they don't, and you can engage in different ways. And so I think that binary of small press, small distributor, big corporate press, big distributor kind of holds for distributors as well. And so I thought what I would do, instead of trying to explain to you, I was just going to pull language from their website so you could sense the difference just by reading that rather than me kind of giving a story. Just the language and the kind of values they try to project. Do you understand what the kind of difference is between these folks?
Should we read them? Should we read them out loud?
Go for it.
Okay, so just quickly. So this is from Hermer Books. Within the broad spectrum of its programs, is it Hermer? Hermer's much-praised exhibition catalogs form a unique constant. Here, Hermer maintains its reputation as a competent partner of museums, art galleries, and universities. The publishing company has for many years cultivated relationships with leading venues of art and culture in both the German-speaking region and internationally. Through its cooperation with Thames and Hudson and the University of Chicago Press, Hermer has a worldwide sales network at its disposal for its large program of English books. And then this is SPD, small press distribution. In an increasingly corporatized book industry, small press distribution brings readers independently published literature, emphasizing small press values, equity, experimentation, and access. We connect underrepresented literary communities to the marketplace and to each other via book distribution events and public advocacy, prioritizing artistic and activist visions. SPD's nearly 400 presses publish a full diversity of writers who rely on us to reach readers nationwide. Yeah, those sound the same to me. That's the same. No, it's a good point, and I feel like, SPD, it's funny because I think of SPD to me is also just this very large sort of monolith of a distributor, but it's like even the big guys, there's the scales within it, and then there's also like art book, DAP, that carry just like a ton of these massive publishers that you were mentioning earlier, Rizzoli, Delmonico, and like Ingram. I don't know. It's there's a large part of it that's very corporatized in this way.
Yeah, and so increasingly, I think distributors. So where things are becoming quite horizontal is I think increasingly distributors use things like Amazon Marketplace and these things. So the only difference between them and you is the network of stores that they can stock in. That's it, because it's increasingly kind of digital marketing. And you know, you go to Hermer and it's, I don't know the numbers, but I would guess it's something like 60% Amazon sales,
Yeah.
40% stores.
Yeah.
So it's, in the spirit of demystifying this too, it's like, you can self-distribute your work.
Yes. We'll talk about self-distribution in a second. Okay, this was.
Oh, so this is just a quick, it's a fact sheet. This is what Herman would ask you for. And it looks quite simple, but if you're not having done kind of the preparation for it, it's gonna take you a long time. Just because it's, they're like 300 words, you're like, oh, I kick that out in 15 minutes. But you never do it, right? And then the images are never the right size. So this is how you would start with them, and this is the beginning of a very long conversation until you decide to accept your book. So
have you distributed? Who do you distribute with?
So we distributed with us. No, we don't distribute with anyone. But at the ICA, I've distributed with Monaco, Herber, a few other people. Rizzoli we've done. So.
Yeah. And I mean, printed matter also technically, we're a distributor. Well, no, we're not. That we say it in our mission statement, but now that I'm thinking about the literal definition of distributor, of selling to other sellers.
Yeah, let's say you're like an outlet.
We distribute, but we're not a distributor. That would be the difference. So just a few sort of technical things in case any of this is new. Things to consider when you have a project that you're working on. If you're pitching something to a publisher, or you have it published and you're pitching it to a distributor, you're gonna get, it's like, what's the edition size? That's just the number of copies of the book that you made in the run. People often ask, like, how many of my book should I make for distribution at Printed Matter? For us accepting the book, we say that you have to have at least 50 copies. To me, that's pretty arbitrary, and I tell people to ignore it, but I think that it's sort of a good rule of thumb. I think that people who are doing small presses, who are doing self-publishing, I don't know, anywhere from 200 to 300 copies, depending on what you can afford and the time that you have, and how you're intending to distribute it. And deciding your edition size. I mean, this is probably familiar to many of you if you make multiples of any kind, right? How many are you going to make versus, the cost of making it and how much you're intending to sell it for. Just sort of balancing those things can be a little bit of just a formula of what you can do within your means.
Right, but the flip side though, just to kind of line up expectations to what's out there, is a large scale distributor won't consider you for under 1,200 copies, and that's probably quite below.
Yeah. And then they'll sort of like take 500 to 1,000 at a time, from what I understand, talking to like the DAP people. So even if you have like an edition of 1,200, you don't want to give 1,000 of your 1,200 books to DAP because that you'll lose a lot of money.
Yeah, but it's also a little bit even more involved in that they too kind of do their marketing research. So if you're like, you have an artist that's having a good moment and you're like, we're going to do 1,500, they might come back and say, no, we want to take 2,500. So in some ways, you have to be able to produce the 2,500.
Yeah, because it's just not worth it to them to take a smaller amount. I was reading, there's a book that's an anthology of different publishing manifestos. It's called Publishing Manifestos. And I was reading it on the airplane, and one of the artists, who I forget their name, but I'll figure it out later, was saying that publishers are sort of like like slot machines, and you like put in your pitch or your like book dummy or whatever, and you pull the handle, and like maybe all cherries come up, and maybe they don't, and it's kind of a mystery what goes on in there, and that's been my experience with large publishers, especially, you know, what you're saying with like, you don't know how they sort of or I don't know how they calculate like what's going to be worthwhile for them to take on.
Yeah, I think it's numbers, right?
It's numbers.
Because they're taking 50 institutions at a time. So I think they're banking on, at the end of the day, all these things will add up to our profit.
And then just a few other things, which this is like a totally incomplete list of things that you could do with bindings and print methods, but when you're you know going to start a project, really think about these things. You know, it's it changes the way that you're communicating your ideas and your work, sort of whether you like it or not, the way that you're presenting it. Bindings, perfect bound, that's a lot of softcover books that you see all glued without any signatures being like the fold of the paper. Spiral bound, self-explanatory, single signature, that's like imagine a zine folded in half, one signature. Multi-signature, many of those sort of sewn together, stitch bound, and then accordion fold, which is a favorite of mine because it is one piece of paper folded over and over, and then you have a book. And yeah, I don't know. If you have I really like to talk about this sort of thing of how the actual sort of craft of the book can really sort of strengthen the project. So if anyone wants to talk about that with me afterwards, I'll totally talk to you about it. And then all the different print methods that you have: digital, letterpress, risograph, which I'm going to talk more about in a second, inkjet, any sort of stuff like that. Photocopy, which is a great option. Offset printing. I don't know. These are things that there's so much information about them online, but just to put the little idea in your head that there are so many options.
Yeah, I also say, you know, like photocopies don't look like your grandma's photocopies anymore.
That's true.
Like the machines are really, you know, you would get a look of what you think a book is, rather than an old photocopy you got in your whatever.
Similar with like print on demand. I don't know how much we want to go into print on demand because it's a very people have big thoughts about it, but I feel like a lot of print on demand books actually look really good these days. Like the site Lulu makes pretty good books, and I was just looking into them for a project. They're like, I don't know, they're like green, they have like neutral carbon emissions, stuff like that, which isn't what I think of when I think of, you know, just the idea of print on demand books. But it is a good option, especially if you know only need to make 10 books. You know, if you're working with a printer, they will not do that project for you.
Yeah, and that's another thing about run size and edition size is, you know, let's say you want to do something cheap in China, that's like a units kind of economy, so they won't start under 1,000. And then it's a unit, so if you get 1,500, you're
That's
unit.
true of a lot of like offset
Yeah.
printers as well. So it's just a few. Yeah, this is what we were just saying: Xerox, Riso, binding your own books, risograph. It is not necessarily DIY actually, because you may have to go to a risograph printer. But I include it on this slide because the sort of ethos of it is still very, you know, take your project into your own hands. Risograph has been incredibly popular in sort of the artist book world, the zine world, comics, you know, activists or organizers making cheap, lots of cheap copies of things. Basically, it's, if you're not familiar, it's sort of, the way I would explain it is a combination, like a sort of a mix between screen printing, and that you're doing one color at a time, and it's being like shot through a master of the color layer that you're printing, and like a copy machine, because it looks like a big copy machine. And I think an actual Riso printer would be really mad at me for explaining it like that, but I'm not a Riso printer. And yeah, there are lots of things that Rizzo's really good at. These two images are from the printer and publisher Textbooks. They're based out of Brooklyn. Yeah, I don't know. It's not good at sort of exact color reproduction and being having an extreme fidelity to the original image. So sometimes photographers don't like it. You can see on the bottom here's like the original image, and that's it with a 4-color Rizzo. So I don't know. But I think if you're excited about the medium changing the source material and the medium being part of your artistic practice itself, Rizzo's great, and it's cheap. And also I think that people who print Rizzo are just so excited about it. There are lots of them, and they'll probably be excited to work with you. This, just speaking of Xerox has been a totally central tool for book artists, people making artist books for a really long time. This is this book it's untitled, but it's called the Xerox book, and it is an exhibition in book form, I think from 1967, 68. And it was very ahead of its time. It was an exhibition that didn't exist anywhere else outside of in this book, and there were of course many of them, being that it was a Xerox book. So that was sort of first edition of 1,000 of those. Yeah, Xerox is great. I think that people sort of see it as like an unprofessional, kind of scrappy thing, and in a way it is. But there's nothing wrong with that, and you can make such an amazing, photocopied Xerox book. So sometimes high school classes come into the bookstore, and I'll tell them a little bit about printed matter and about photocopying and like image appropriation and that part of the history of things, and they're like, "What's a Xerox?" I'm like, oh my god. But yeah, and then this is Yu Chen actually on the right. She's also an educator and teaches our bookbinding classes. And during the pandemic, she started making videos for us that were sort of translations of her workshops just into do it at home videos. So those are all on Printed Matter's YouTube channel, and they're great resources.
Yeah, in terms of DIY, another thing that we use a lot is tabloids. So we found a printer whose business is to do like the Publix tabloids. So that's how they make their money. So they'll just do jobs really cheap for us. So I think we do 1,000 tabloids, a single page, single color tabloid, for under $200.
Yeah.
So there's ways to do things.
That's similar to how I printed the newsprint publication we did. We just found this printer who does newspapers for schools, school newspapers in like upstate New York, and they did a great job.
Yeah. They won't print for us on Wednesdays.
They what?
On Wednesdays.
On Wednesdays.
That's our Publix coupon day print out. Yeah.
But yeah, a little bit about self-distribution. It is, yeah, you can do it. Anyone can do it. I don't know, it seems daunting, but I really feel like it's sort of all about persistence and just a really high volume of cold emails. Cold emails are sort of your friend with this kind of thing. Distributing, obviously, through bookstores, that would be the main one. So the way it works for Printed Matter, we have an open submission policy. We always accept submissions. It's free to submit. The sort of title for review form is really, really basic. And you just have to give us one copy of whatever it is you've made. You can ship it to us. Please submit your books if you make them, when you make them. And then we generally take new books on consignment, and a lot of bookstores, especially independent bookstores, will do a consignment model. We'll have to do it that way because just there's no way that we can purchase up front all of the inventory that we have. That would be too much money. But also, we also do purchase and do work with people who are wholesaling their stuff with us. Our consignment split is 50-50. That's pretty standard. When we purchase wholesale stuff, it's anywhere from, we'll get a wholesale that's kind of 35 to 50% generally. If you're consigning with a bookstore and your stuff is selling, definitely ask them to switch to a purchasing model, because then you'll get your money up front. It's a lower risk for you, whereas purchasing is the higher risk for the bookstore. But if they know you, trust you, they'll probably switch to it. Pricing your work. This is sort of, I don't know, it's sort of like a work backwards thing. Like, how much money do you need to make, or do you want to make off of a single copy, and then taking into consideration obviously the production cost, how much it costs to make one of the book, and then the if you're consigning it, what the consignment percentage is, if you're wholesaling it, what the wholesale discount is, and sort of work back from there. And I just would say go to bookstores and see what similar projects are selling for, and ask the people who work at the bookstores what is very popular here, what sells here, see the price points that those are at, because as much as you can just sort of run the numbers, if you end up learning that you will have to price your zine at like $40, it probably it will be harder to sell depending on what it is.
Yeah, and I also think it depends the time span of your project. Because if it's an immediate scene you want to put out, then you need to price it based on your cost. But if this is like a long-term project that you can fundraise for, get a few grants, it might be okay that it's a loss in the end. I mean, so like at the ICA, for instance, our books never break even. That's why we kind of fundraise ahead, so that it's not it's not based on whether they did really well at sales. That's already kind of taken care of. So I think if you have a long-term thing that you can fundraise for, then you can kind of you can also use price to make a point, right? So we have these $10 books at ICA that do not cost $10. But the point is, you want to disseminate these ideas and kind of create this kind of democratic distribution. So we just have to fundraise up front and pay for all this and eat the losses.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of organizations sort of make up for how much money they lose in publishing and like their other stuff, right? For printed matter, it's that way. We don't make any money from the books that we publish. It's the books that we sell for other people, and fundraising, obviously. Yeah, I get shipping your books. Media mail is also your friend. It's really cheap to ship media mail within the U.S. If you're shipping internationally, ask the bookstore to pay for it. See if they will. Social media and websites, obviously, that has been a massive retail outlet, especially in the last 3 years, for individual artists, but for larger institutions too. There was such a scramble in 2020 for people to figure out how to sell things online really well, because suddenly we couldn't do it in store.
Yeah, I mean, I can give you some real numbers. So like that blue book, if you want to hold it up, that medium ale is about $4 national. International, that'll be $25.
Yeah.
So it's more expensive sometimes. So the book is $15. So the shipping, international shipping in particular, would be quite expensive.
Yeah.
So if you're selling internationally, you should build that into your invoice.
Yeah. And then, just other modes of self-distribution. Book fairs, it's hard to exhibit at a book fair as an individual a lot of the time, especially if you don't have, like 10 publications that you can apply with. However, something that I do see a lot at the New York Art Book Fair and other fairs, the Zine Fair, is publishers that are there will sort of like feature an artist who isn't exhibiting all of themselves, but if you know publishers, museums, any sort of entity that may exhibit at a book fair, it's totally done, that individuals are featuring their work at those tables. And then also, advocate for yourself to do book launches at the bookstores that are stocking your work once you have those relationships, or even before you have the relationships. The number of people that email me that are like, "This is my book, will you do a launch?" I wish more of them would, because there have been some great events. And I mean, also remember that book launches are really something that the bookstores need as well. It's a massive part of our income to do launch events like that. So remember, the bookstores need you just as much as you need them. And then something that I think that people may forget about, I forget about, is to do sort of specific outreach to special collections, to institutions, university libraries, museum libraries, and individual collectors if you can, although that can be sort of harder to just like track down and cold email. But in a similar way to what I was saying about how there are so many small presses, there's going to be something that really fits with what you're doing. It's also the case with special collections. Yeah.
Locally, I think the most active one is the University of Miami Special Collections, and they're quite interested in gathering stuff and purchase stuff, right? Because there's also other places where you can just give it to them.
Yeah.
So like the
Which is also
so something like the Vasari Archive at the public library, they just don't have any funds to purchase, so you just have to kind of donate to them. But their mission is to keep a record of the art produced in South Florida from 1945 to the present. So they're interested in getting books.
Yeah, there are a ton that are just sort of geographically specific as well as thematically.
We can go to the next slide.
Okay. Yes. Well, this is sort of what I was saying before. I just added some pictures of nice books to this slide that I wanted to show you. I guess, this is what I was saying before. If you're making a book, if you are in the business of making artist books, then you know this really intimately already, because that is what the craft is making the book is the art object. But if you're not, consider it, And like I said before, every part of the physical makeup of the book will, affect the experience of the person, holding it. Like, whether you like it or not, this is something that I started at Printed Matter because I was studying bookmaking and book binding and printmaking, and I was sort of the mind that I was like, I don't really care, if my lines are straight or the signatures are tight, because that's not what my book is about. And my professor would be like, well, it is now, because you didn't think about it. Anyway, so it's just something to consider, and it can make your project a lot stronger. So on the right here on the top, that's an issue of Martha's Quarterly, which is a periodical published by Passenger Pigeon Press. The artist is Tammy Wynn, and she's amazing. We did a print edition with her to benefit Printed Matter St. Mark's last year. Martha's Quarterly, it's a pretty small run. They make 200 or 300 of each issue, and it's just these beautifully and creatively made books that sort of have a focus on science and climate and technology and colonialism and these things all together. And this one was about climate change broadly, and it's called Body Heat, the issue, and it's this simply put together actual pages, but it's wrapped in a scarf, right? So like the book is really warm, body heat, everything's heating up. On the bottom right, that's an accordion book by the artist Helen Douglas, who is really amazing. She's still making books, was sort of a predominant book artist starting in the 70s in Glasgow. And it's just, she does these photo books that are so beautiful because she makes them accordions. It's just this extremely sweeping sort of panoramic view of what she is seeing that you wouldn't really get in sort of a typical photo book. And then this is a really old folio of woodblock prints by an artist, Richard Tyler, who founded this, it's called the Uranian Phalanstery in the Lower East Side in 1958. And this is a collection of woodblock prints that are sort of personifications in poetry about all the planets and it's in this beautiful folio, and so you have to sort of flip through all of them, and they are both sort of one-off woodblock prints, but also, you know, get sort of loosely bound into this collection as a book, and they're amazing to go through. Richard O. Tyler. Yeah, he's crazy. Yeah, we have an exhibition actually up at the store right now that are reproductions of every print in this series. That's why I put it in, honestly. It was like right there. This is nice. Yeah, I don't know. Like when you're publishing, what I guess curious to know your sort of thought process about, like, you know, because even if it's not like an artist book, still picking your paper, right? I think that you could have this sort of similar mindset.
Yeah, I was as you were speaking, I was thinking of something else that I always tell my students, and it's like your materials are actually your enemy, right?
Oh no.
Hear me out. That's what they say too. But it's because they come with an idea. They have like perfectly like verbalized, and then they think, oh, there's just these materials that I'm going to imprint this idea, and the materials are not going to fight me back. And I think that goes back to the first kind of quote that I put up about the book as a spatial thing, right? Yeah. So it's like, yeah, you have this idea, and you know you want to make a book, but what is the book going to do to your idea, right?
A lot.
What is it not gonna allow you to do, right? This is why it's a bit of your enemy, because you have this great crystallized idea. You're like, oh, my book is gonna be about the sunsets or whatever, and the book is like, okay, but not the way you think, right? So I tell them, because then I think if you don't think of it that way, then all of a sudden your book, well, it's not about 26 gas stations. It's gonna start looking like the books you remember, or that you know. It's just a default, right? That's the easiest path. Is you go back to things that you know are significant historically. So if you don't think of the object too as some kind of active resistance to your idea, you're going to slip into forms that are already present in the world.
Which I think is just sort of another reason why it can be really good to, like, at the very conception of your idea of your project, think of it as a book project, right? Because if you're thinking about that as the beginning, the materials then are just sort of like your materials. Maybe they don't have to be an enemy. I don't know. But I see, absolutely. I see what you're saying, and sometimes it's hard to talk, or it can be hard, or even sort of, people are disappointed sometimes in the limitations if they have their sort of preconceived idea. People, totally. Something that, oh gosh, what was I going to say? Oh, as translation, it's up there. Yeah. I feel like it's similar to what I tell people who are wanting to work on a book project, is that making your idea into a book is an act of translation. It's like translating text into another language, which sort of goes back to the idea of a book, an artist book, a regular book, normal book, whatever it is, being a mode to communicate information. It's always going to be that. And so it's just sort of like the stuff of it is going to change. So your project's going to be different. It's going to be in a different language than it was in your head. But translations are beautiful.
Yeah, but I think that's a good analogy, right? Because when you actually do try to translate, language is really your enemy.
Yes.
Like you read it in one language that you understand, you're like, oh, I got this. And then you try to put it in another language, and that language is like, oh no. Syntax doesn't work like you think it works, or whatever. Or this translation of syntax in Spanish or whatever, it doesn't work this way.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh my god, this is...
And you have a crisis of like, oh, I'm changing my thing.
Yeah.
It's not my thing anymore.
Right.
But it is. It's still your thing. It's just a new thing. Okay. This is the last sort of section. Just some resources. I'll say printed matter. On our website, we have a really extensive section that's called the bulletin. It's sort of hidden in the website, so I can show it to you after this. But it has a really extensive glossary of bookbinding and printing terms. It has a list of independent bookstores all over the country and internationally, different printers, also just sort of organized by geographical location, different book fairs, different grants, all of these things. So I really encourage you to look through that. And yeah, also just like look at a lot of books if you're trying to make a book. Look at a ton of books, and you know, if you see a project that is similar to yours, even if it's not similar to yours, but it's like, you know, printed in a way that you really like, see who printed it, and then talk to that printer. You know, if it is a project that's, you know, conceptually similar to yours or in the content, who published it, talk to that publisher. And you know, if you don't, there's just such big networks that maybe are just a little bit below the surface of all of these things that you can really sort of tap into just by talking to the right people. So even if you reach out to a publisher and they're like, we're not taking any work, but here's all the publishers that I know. They know all the publishers, and they'll connect you with those people. Yeah, some Florida-based organizations, Exile Books, kind of similar to Printed Matter. They have some physical locations, do fairs, do some publishing. Tampa Zine Fair, a zine fair, Tropic Bound, also book fair, and then Dale Zine. They're just great publishers and have a physical shop here as well.
No, that sounds pretty good too.
So I want to bring some economics into this for a minute. I have friends who publish radios in Santa Fe. They require $30,000. I can't remember if it's total $30,000 or the artist has to give them $15,000. A lot of money. So how many of these small publishers? I was kind of curious, like the Edward Shea book. Did he ever get any like royalties from all of the reproductions of that book? You know, that's kind of a hypothetical. I don't know if anybody knows. But you know, these things cost a lot of money. I mean, Radius puts out beautiful, beautiful books. So how common is that? And I noticed with your book, one of your books, Gean, that there's some ads in the back.
Yeah, this is something that Emmett and I spoke about, and maybe we've just been skirting around. But it's kind of like, if you're gonna make a book as an artist project, what are the internal dynamics of that project? So the reason this is ads is because we went to work with young designers, and all they kept telling us was like, oh, we're not artists. We're like in the real world. You know, money, this and that. So we said, okay, so then let's not make the book until we get 10 ads that pay for the printing. So it's like taking the logic that they wanted to kind of project and be okay, so let's not kind of not leave it imprinted in this process. So that's why that has ads. It's just the only ones that have ads are the designer.
That's an uncommon situation.
Yeah.
But how many small publishers do you think require the artist to come up with half or more of the publishing costs?
I mean, we've never asked, when we've invited artists, we've never asked them for anything. We fundraise on our own. And then the only time that there's a kind of exchange of money in that way is when we work with big institutions. But that's contracted work, editorial management and things. So basically we just become, for that particular book, their editorial department. So we do everything. But when we've invited artists, we've never asked them for any money.
So that's an unusual situation what Radius does, it sounds
Yeah,
like.
I don't think it's probably not unusual for companies of that scale. Maybe, I don't know. Printed Matter, we pay people when we make books with them because we have grants for it.
Yeah.
Not very much, but we do pay them because it's it's grant based. It's fundraised. We get like NEA grants and Andy Warhol Foundation grants.
Yeah, we used to do in the early artist books. We used to do $1,000 stipend and 10% of the run would go to them.
Yeah.
And that was the pay for
Yeah.
their labor in the process.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we've never asked. But that might just be their business model, right? They just may have established themselves.
But I mean, it's
Yeah.
frustrating because then it's just such like a pay to play thing.
Well, totally. I mean, the artists that I know that worked with them have done sort of like a limited edition print or something like that to try to
Yeah.
pay for it. And they figure, you know, this is a very high-end book that's there forever. It's their legacy in a way, you know, so that's, they just come up with the money.
Yeah.
No, I don't mean to disparage it. It's just
No,
like it's hard because it does seem like such a barrier.
It is, it really is a barrier. So maybe people, you know, with high-end galleries, gallery images and
Yeah.
that kind of.
Yeah. I mean, your question about Bruschetta is interesting. I wonder, I mean, I don't know, because so much of, you know, the legacy of that book is people doing their own. Like, we have a book at the store that's, like 26 Wawa stores, which I didn't know what Wawa was. No, I'm from California. I don't know what that is.
It's a flyover state.
Yeah. But that and, you know, 26 Los Angeles apartments we have, and I really doubt it. I mean, but also something so central to the history and, you know, ongoing history of artist books is like image appropriation and just like taking
We had a local
images.
artist, her name is Karen Rifus, who did 26 funeral homes.
26 funeral homes? That's a good one. Yeah, I've heard of some workshops, artist book workshops where everybody makes their own Ruche book, 26 whatever. You should do it. It's nice.
I have a question. Is there anything going on with like digital zines or art books, or like what does that landscape look like? Can you like pitch differently than physical book?
Yes.
What's different? Yeah.
Yeah. There's a ton. There's a ton of digital projects, or like, you know, people are saying like now like digitally native projects that maybe then become, you know, have a print element but have begun online. There's an amazing project called Library of the Printed Web that what's that person's name? Paul Suellis does that project. And yeah, they have a publishing manifesto in that book that I was talking about. Yeah, it's there is a lot of it. I think that people have started to think about the internet as sort of an extension of this idea of sort of democratization of art, of ideas. Send the link, make it free. Are you wondering about sort of how to find that, or different sort of like ways to communicate your idea about it?
Well, I'm a photographer and I do like street photography or landscape, and I feel like the process of translating it from like digital, you know, screen to printed is kind of daunting because there's like all the paper and filing and like how much should I invest in that versus just creating the thing. Like if I just create the thing and it's a digital version, you know, maybe it's less intimidating because then it's done. But then can I pitch that, like do I print my own pitch, or do I pitch it digital, or does it not matter? Like too many things to think about at that point.
Yeah, I know. I mean, a lot of people who are pitching photography books will make book dummies, and I don't think you really have to worry about the quality of the printing for that sort of thing. It's more of a proof of concept, from what I understand. But I think that for photo projects in particular, I see a lot of interesting online presentations of photography projects, and I think that pretty much everything that we said here about book form, you can take those ideas into thinking about web form as well, right? Because it is, I don't know, anything sort of time-based is sort of sequential. You can think about moving through a website in the same way you could think about moving through a book. And that could be a really, you know, then maybe you don't need to make a physical book dummy. You know, you can make a digital mock-up of a book, all of these things. I think that you're totally right to think of it as a tool to sort of pitch your project to people.
So you're both exposed to an ocean of self-published work, right? I mean, it's just, there's a lot out there, there's a lot of overlap, and I would imagine there's a lot of personal narrative-based work. What are some of the more aggressive printing or distribution
Don't do that. The publisher gender fail comes to mind, and I'll show you this book afterwards if you want. That's this person be explaining their practice. An aggressive self-publishing strategy. I don't know. I feel like people feel really complicated about Instagram and like selling through Instagram or social media in general, but it can be effective. I think that people are really persistent who come physically into the bookstore to give me their things and restock their things and just be involved as they can, even when technically they're not like involved in the, it's to the point where like we're distributing their book. It's happened, but they're still present and like have relationships with us. And then those are the type of people also that we'll do a book launch with, right? Because like we know them, they come around, we know that they're sort of pleasant to interact with, and that's as big a part of it as anything else. I don't know if that really counts as like an aggressive sort of like guerrilla self-publishing strategy, which I like the idea of that. And I would like to think of one.
Maybe social media showing up versus is an aggressive gesture.
No, totally, and I think that it can help or hurt, but done in the right way is definitely a help.
Yeah. So maybe this is slightly to the side, but aggressive strategies. The artist that was in the slide with the books that slotted on the wall, he actually has an exhibition now at ICA-VCU in Virginia, Commonwealth University, and he got them to buy him binding machines and printers, and now he has a full lab for printing, right? So it's not aggressive distribution, but it's aggressively siphoning resources from
Yeah,
the institution.
no, totally.
to
Just
then
like
have-
ask for things,
Yeah.
and some people will give them to you for free sometimes, or they just won't, and then you will have asked. Also, some people there's sort of like art squatting in a way, like at the fairs. Some people just like at the zine fair, it's outside. It's just like we get a city permit to shut down the block, no traffic, we're in the street. So much fun. And people will just like come and who we don't know who they are and start selling their books on the street. And it's sort of like I like kind of look and I'm like, as long as it's not, stuff that I don't, want around or like associated with the event, I'm like, that's great. It's like a DIY event. Who am I to tell you to like get lost because you're not on our exhibitor list? I don't know. Yeah.
I was curious to know how would you market or distribute a book that has two subjects in one? In my case, it's art and psychology, because I cannot just approach people into art only and same into psychology, so it will be,
Yeah, I still don't know an answer. I guess I don't know exactly. I'm having a hard time visualizing what you described.
I mean, there is art, but the subject is psychology.
But it sounds like a psychology book with art illustrations or examples. No?
No, no. There is really an art component, but also, yeah.
Well, just as a general, I would say you can have more luck with art people than psychology people with these hybrid kind of books.
Yeah, I think that sort of the arena broadly of artist books is pretty forgiving when it comes to projects that are interdisciplinary like that, because so many of them are like that. I brought some books too from the store that you should come and look through when we're done. This is a book called Data Mining the Amazon, and it's about Amazon and data mining. And is this woman, Angie, what's her last name? Waller or something? It's about it's about books on Amazon and the sort of algorithm of suggesting other books. There's this cool fold out in the middle that is, but it's just like a tree of how Amazon Music will sort of recommend more stuff to people who like the Beatles, and it's just all of this stuff. So this is not starting out as art, but we carry this, as an artist book, as a project that was conceived for book form. So it sounds like what you're doing is sort of like conceived as its own whole project. So I don't know, I would just sort of, don't predetermine your project as like not fitting into any one category. Because I think that you can present it to people as, a cohesive thing. If you're finding the right people who are open to, multidisciplinary projects like that.
It's like a personal research, but
Right.
involves two disciplines.
I mean, there's so many research-based artist books. I love research-based artist books. They're my favorite.
Well, thank you guys. I appreciate it. I was able to publish my own zine, like a first series, and I focused most of my distribution through social media. And I'm on the cusp of doing a second version of it. And I've actually learned a couple little things that I'm like, it's why I wanted to come here, because I feel like I had a job. I'm art school dropout, focused on capitalism and making money because it was just really hard. Did not have a silver spoon. Grew up here, moved to California, I lost my job last year. So then I decided, no, I'm gonna focus on art, focus on what I've been wanting to do, and I feel like I'm about to make a lot of changes in the way that this series of that I'm working on. So I wanted to know if you had any advice on, I don't know, like making like major changes to the way that I'm distributing, because I feel like not only distributing but publishing as well, because I feel like I did a newspaper zine, but I kind of want to go into the world of magazines and talk about maybe some advice on releasing some of the stress of changing the way that I'm presenting what I'm doing, but still kind of within the same realm of what I'm doing. If that makes any sense. And also, Brian Penning says hello. His girlfriend is an old roommate of mine in LA, and I was like, this guy just mentioned Brian.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure how to answer because I'm not exactly sure what, changes is a bit big word.
Yeah, first of all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know, but as you were talking about, I was thinking is if you have these like long-running projects, maybe one place to kind of put some energy into is into the fundraising, right? So if you have something like mapped out, you think this is going to be a series of things, like folks like the Ellies, for instance, that could be something that you could kind of bring, a rounded project to. And so maybe this, some of the stress, right? If you have like a funding source, some of the stress that you're feeling can go away, and this change you're looking for, maybe, it's one thing to change and have to pay the rent,
Yeah.
go to work every morning,
Yes.
and another thing to have like your funding for the project you're working on, and now
Take more
really
risks.
focusing in on it.
Too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think, I mean, I don't know, I just, in your head, I'm sure when you say change is something very concrete, but outwardly it just, I don't know what you mean.
Yeah.
But I just think maybe, rather maybe than focus on the change moment, why don't you just take a step back and look at the entire arc of the project and start thinking it from fundraising, from pre-planning, planning before you even think about changes, or as you think about changes.
I think another way to think about it would be to ask yourself, like what's staying the same about the project, and why is that staying the same? Like that's the thing that seems, is like the kernel of it, and may have, the part that's most important to you, or the part that was successful in this first iteration, of your project, and you know, if you know what's staying the same, then it's like, okay, well, everything else needs to be figured out now from that. But I don't know, to have sort of a strong and solid, I don't know, clarity of purpose. I feel like for magazines, I feel like I see a lot of projects that are sort of like, we're an art magazine. I'm like, I know you're an art magazine because you're showing me an art magazine, but like, what is your project, you know? And yeah, so it's just